Hey traders, welcome back to the FXE YouTube channel. We got the move to the downside that I mentioned in my previous video, and we broke a lot of lower time frame structure. Now I'm just waiting to see if we get a daily break or not. If we do, then we'll likely see a pullback and then further continuation to the downside. So for today's video, I'll do a quick market review and then give some trading ideas for today. But first, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's get into it. Okay, first let's talk about the fundamental. We have a pretty big day of news today. In London, we have a bunch of manufacturing PMI data coming in, as well as GBP manufacturing PMI. And prior to New York session, Lagarde will speak, and then during AM session, we have manufacturing PMI. So once again, potential movement in both London and New York sessions. As for the yields, you can see that we've had quite a bit of continuation further to the downside. The 5-year has come well below the lower fair value gap now. 10-year is getting close to the lower fair value gap. And 30-year has just come through the upper daily fair value gap. So as you can see, all of them are pulling back at the moment. It looks like we will see further continuation to the downside, but so far it hasn't had a huge effect on the dollar. Now moving on to DXY, starting with the daily time frame. So as I mentioned in my previous video, there's a lot of reason for DXY to come up from this area. And you can see it has come up quite significantly. It's gone through the tiny daily fair value gap. And currently we're starting to see a pullback. The buy side liquidity is above and the weekly fair value gap is just above it. If we move to the 4-hour time frame, you can see that DXY has come into the 4-hour fair value gap and it's having a reaction. DXY also created a significant volume imbalance above. I'm guessing that it will eventually fill it, but for the time being, not clear if it will continue higher or come back down after filling the volume imbalance. Now if we go on to the hourly time frame, so you can see that DXY went right through the hourly fair value gap that was created on the way up. Well, actually during the market reset it went through it, and since then it has come back above it, but you can see right now it's having a pullback. I'm guessing that it will continue higher to fill the volume imbalance, which will bring price to the hourly supply, and we'll just need to watch and see the reaction that we get from there or not. So if we come into the supply and have a shift, then it's very likely that we'll come right back down, probably for some of the imbalance that's left behind on the left. Now if we go on to the lower time frame, you can see that DXY came down quite low. It swept some internal liquidity, came into the 15-minute demand, so the extreme. It's currently in the volume imbalance. Well, actually it came to the volume imbalance and now is below it. It looks to me that it's coming back for inefficiency before continuing further to the upside. My guess is that we will continue higher to fill the volume imbalance. It's not necessary if it just wants to come down, but in more cases than not, for DXY, we often see the volume imbalance filled before it makes its next move. And you can see there's a 15-minute fair value gap towards the extreme of the supply. If we could reach there, then that'll be the area that I'll be watching to see if we get a reaction and potential shift from. And if we do, then I'll be looking for longs on EU at that point. For now, I don't really have a strong bias. I feel it can go either way. I suspect that we will see continuation today as bullish PD arrays, as you can see, are being respected. But there is always a chance that we can see DXY head right back down after reaching this supply, or potentially sweeping the highs before reversing and coming back down. Before we move on to EU, I just want to quickly show you or give an update on what we're seeing on EG. So you can see that we did have that weekly shift that I mentioned in my weekend video, and currently it's having a significant pullback. Doesn't look so significant here, but if you go on to the hourly time frame, you can see it's come up quite a bit. It looks like it's going for this inefficiency above, and then from there it may turn around and come right back down. But because it's pushing up so strongly, we're seeing a lot of strength in euro right now. So this could be a determining factor on what happens with EU today, because if this just continues to the upside and targets these equal highs, or maybe even the highs over here, then we're going to see a lot of short-term strength on euro. And if we do, then we'll probably see EU come up for a pullback today. Now on to EU, starting with the daily time frame. So Wednesday we had the start of the move, and then yesterday we had a massive continuation to the downside. It's come down quite low in the range, well into OTE. So if we look at the fibs on the left, we're well into OTE right now. It could reverse from here and continue higher, but to be honest, not really sure this rally is done. As I said in previous videos, there are no efficiencies at this level on the left. There's only the order block and the resting liquidity below. If it reaches for that resting liquidity, then that'll be a daily shift. It's currently in the order block right now and is showing some strength in this area, especially during Asia today. So now we just need to see if it continues higher, breaks the current range, or if it turns around and continues lower. If we go on the 4-hour time frame, you can see that we did sweep some liquidity on the left. So swept this liquidity. As well as this liquidity right here. And this is a pretty strong area of liquidity because, like I explained in previous videos, when you see a sweep of a sweep, then that is generally a strong area that it's come down to. So for now, this 4-hour fair value gap that it's in is holding. Price has come into the supply above. Pullback makes sense, as I explained with DXY, to some of the lower levels, but we'll just have to see what happens in the next couple hours. London Open, well, Frankfurt Open will be in about an hour and a half, and then 2 hours and a half for London Open. So we'll see if we get that pullback during that time, and if we do, then it's just a matter to see what happens at the extreme. So on the hourly time frame, so you can see that we filled that 4-hour fair value gap and came into the hourly supply. That's great. So it's pushing up higher. From there, we had a push to the downside, came into an hourly fair value gap, reacting off of it and coming right back up. So my original idea is this was just a pullback and we'll see continuation from here, but it's kind of looking like it may just continue to the upside. So just have to wait and see the next few minutes to see if it starts to come back down or if it continues further to the upside from here. But I would be surprised if EU continued to push higher from here without giving a bigger pullback and mitigating the hourly demand. There is a fair value gap as well before reversing and continuing further to the upside. But if it does continue and breaks the Asia high as well as the range high, then it's very likely that it'll just continue to the upside from here. After breaking, we may get a pullback, maybe into a breaker, or potentially sweep these lows before continuing higher. But it's more likely to go up than down if it does break the range highs. And if we go to the lower time frame, so on the lower time frame, you can see that we did have a shift to the downside. So this for me was a confirmation that we were going to head lower. But now as we've come right back up to the extreme, kind of looks like it may just continue and break those highs. Whoops, that's not fair value gap, that's supply. So we'll just have to wait and see if we get a reaction here and further continuation to the downside, which would make sense. Like I said, with Dixie, we still have that volume imbalance to fill. So coming down to the lower levels makes sense to me. Ideally, that's what I'd like to see. But honestly, I'm not really convinced that it's just going to go to the moon from here and take back some of the imbalance above. I feel it makes more sense at this point to continue lower, and if it does want to shift bearish, then break the daily low, and then after that wait for a bigger pullback. But personally, I'm not looking for continuation plays for the time being. But if EU makes it to the 15-minute fair value gap and we get a shift, then I will start looking for buys. So just to sum up, my bias is currently more bearish on EU. That may change by the time London session begins. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens in this area from now until London session. The bearish PD rays are still being respected, so I would like to see EU come down a little lower. Whether it continues and breaks a low and breaks down or melts to the downside after that is a different story. For now, I would just like to see EU come back into the extreme, target this 15-minute fair value gap, and then from there, if we get a reaction and a shift, then I'll look for longs. So in terms of my bullish scenario, so the first one is if we continue from here, break the Asia high and break the range high, then after that I'll look for a pullback, whether it's in the breaker block or lower, for continuation higher to go for the inefficiencies that were left behind. So like I said, breaker block or maybe even below this low, take some liquidity before reversing and continuing to the upside. The second scenario I'll be looking for is pullback back into the extreme, preferably in this fair value gap. See if we get a shift here, thereafter continuation to the upside. And then for bearish scenarios, basically I would like to see price go through this fair value gap. We'll probably play around at the extreme and then break down below the extreme, pull back, maybe breaker or maybe some inefficiency that were left on the way down before continuation to the downside. And if it does continue to the downside, I'll be targeting the daily lows. We also have a fair value gap there as well. And then if we're able to reach there today, which I'm not sure we will, but if the bearish scenario plays out and we do get that continuation to the downside, once we get into this fair value gap, then I'll be out of my sells and potentially be looking for longs, because once we break that low, we'll probably come back for some of the inefficiency that was left behind on the push down before we have further continuation to the downside. Anyways, that sums up today's update. Hopefully you guys found some value in today's video, and if you did, give a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Good luck trading today, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.
Black Swan.